The Buey-Morin Power System. Thomas Buey of America and Gerard Morin of Canada both worked on developing a self-powered system which provides kilowatts of excess power to power other equipment. Thomas feels strongly that water and electricity are part of a person's rights and not a privilege which has to be paid for. They developed this self-powered generator in order to supply the electric needs of a household. First, we need to know what sort of power is used by typical household appliances. Perhaps this illustration might help. 10 watts mobile phone. 30 watts radio. 50 watts fan. 100 watts bulb. 150 watts television set. 600 watts refrigerator. 1500 watts kettle. 1800 watts deep fat fryer. 2000 watts electric fire. 2250 watts washing machine. 2500 watts tumble dryer. 3000 watts to 6000 watts cooker. 3000 watts shower. 3000 watts air conditioning. These power levels are only approximate as many devices have different power settings which the user can select. For example, in Iraq during the night, some households have communal air conditioning of only 1000 watts, Americans have daytime air conditioning of at least 3000 watts, while in Britain almost no households have any kind of air conditioning, while some adults in India don't know what an electric fire is. Anyway, it would be nice to be able to power electrical equipment without having to pay for electricity, and that is what this system allows you to do, whether it is the 120 volt 60 cycles per second used in America or the 240 volt 50 cycles per second used in the rest of the world. The self-powered electricity generator which can provide you with free electricity is essentially very simple in outline. A battery is used to power a standard DC to AC inverter. Then the voltage is stepped up to around 400 volts. Next, a special controller is used to feed that 400 volts to a powerful motor at high frequency, and finally, the motor is used to spin an AC generator called an alternator which produces the electricity which we want. Part of that electricity is fed back to the battery and inverter input in order to make the system self-powered. The magic is caused by the high voltage and the high-speed pulses with which that voltage is applied to a carefully chosen type of motor. With 700 watts of input power, the system puts out 10,000 watts of power. The most important components of this system are the controller and the motor. You are probably familiar with the most common type of motor, which is a single-phase motor, but the more powerful motors used in industry are three-phase motors. There are several varieties of three-phase motors, but the one which we want to use has 36 coils connected as 3 sets of 12 windings in parallel. This is a very powerful arrangement, as sending one pulse of current to each of these 3 chains only advances the motor by 30 degrees. There is a continuous ring of magnets immediately outside the coils. This motor is used in a Samsung washing machine. A 3-phase motor sounds very technical, but it really isn't. It is just a motor which has 3 sets of drive coils instead of just one coil. Coil set 1 is 12 coils all wired in parallel so that they act as a single coil. Coil set 2 is 12 coils all wired in parallel so that they act as a single coil. Coil set 3 is 12 coils all wired in parallel so that they act as a single coil. So, the motor has effectively just 3 coils in it, and it is made to go round by pulsing the coils in order, that is coil 1, then coil 2, then coil 3, then coil 1 again, and so on. The more rapidly the coils are pulsed, the faster the motor rotates, and in this system that rotation can be very fast indeed. The pulsing of those 3 coil sets one after the other in sequence, is done by the controller unit, which is a key component in this design. The motor is a permanent magnet, synchronous motor which has no sensors built into it. That sounds ever so impressive, but it is actually the cheapest type of 3-phase motor, and because it has no sensors, it is the most difficult to drive reliably. There are several varieties of 3-phase motors, but the one which we want to use has 36 coils connected as 3 sets of 12 coils in parallel. The controller consists of 2 parts. The first is an Arduino board, which is a general-purpose development board, essentially a simple computer which can be programmed from an ordinary PC or laptop. It holds the program in its memory and runs it whenever it is instructed to do so. The second part is an electronics link between the Arduino board and the motor. That link boosts the power fed to the motor using high power transistors which can feed high currents to the motor, and some other wires which feed information back to the Arduino board to give it full control of what is happening with the motor. The Arduino program powers the motor coils in sequence, and as well as that, it senses the position of the actual rotor as it spins. It does that by sensing the voltages in each of the 3 coil sets at all times. At the website here, https://www.spares.co.uk/product/es1578438/washing machine motor. The motor is offered at £150, and here, https://www.buyspares.co.uk/washing machine/Samsung/catalog place also at £150. It is not necessary for you to become an expert programmer of an Arduino board, as the program used is provided for you here. A good instruction video on programming the Arduino Uno board is shown here. The Arduino code is shown below is from https://simplecircuit.com/Arduino sensorless BLDC motor controller ESC/ but can be downloaded as a text file from www.freeenergyinfo.com/arduino.txt. The Arduino board looks like this. The interface between the Arduino Uno board and the motor needs the following components: 6 IRF840 field effect transistors, 3 IR2104 dip gate driver integrated circuit, 3 1.3 mega ohm 0.5 watt resistors, 3 10 kilo ohm 0.5 watt resistors, 3 33 kilo ohm resistors, 6 100 ohm quarter watt resistors, 3 IN5408 or UF5408 diodes, 3 10 microfarad 25 volt capacitors, 3 2.2 microfarad 25 volt capacitors, 2 push buttons, 12 volt source, construction board and connecting wires. These components are connected up like this. We need to connect this Arduino Uno up to drive one of the 3 phases of our 3-phase motor. So to do that we will use an IR2104 driver chip and an IRF840 field effect transistor, FET, to feed our 400 volt power supply to the motor at some 14,800 pulses per second. So, the power drive for the first phase is like this. The 1N5408 diode can handle high voltages and so protect the 12 volt section of the circuit from the high voltage section feedback. The power drive for the second phase is, and the power drive for the third phase is. But we also need to provide the Arduino board with feedback information to let it know where the motor is in its rotation. That is done by sensing the phase connections to the motor like this. First, a word of warning here. You can get a shock from any voltage above 30 volts. If the voltage is alternating current at a frequency under 100 cycles per second, as is supplied by your mains wall socket, then that shock can be serious. The power supply described here is very easy to understand and to make, but if you get a shock from it, that shock is very likely to kill you. Disclaimer: you are responsible for your own actions. This document is for information purposes only, and if you decide to make or experiment with voltages higher than 12 volts, then you and you alone are responsible for your actions, and neither the author, the web hosting service, nor anyone else is responsible for what you do or for any damage or injury caused by your own actions. Having said that, please understand that if you are careful and sensible, there is no danger in constructing this power generator in spite of the very high 400 volt input to this power driver circuit. To stay safe, you make all the necessary connections and insulate them before you apply power. So, we need to construct an electronics component board to connect the Arduino to the phases of the motor. Please remember that this board will be carrying 400 volts, and so you need to enclose the board in a plastic box before powering it up. The suggestion for a physical layout for the components is based on using strip board like this. These boards come in many sizes and are very versatile. However, because the pin spacing of integrated circuit is just 0.1 inches, the solder joints can be very close together, and that does not suit a beginner to soldering, so ask a friend for help in soldering unless you are already expert. We want to place these components on the board, so perhaps a layout like this might be suitable. The red circles show where the copper strip on the underside of the board is to be broken. You can make 3 separate board, one for each phase, or you can place all 3 circuits on a single board. Integrated circuits are heat sensitive, so I suggest that you use a socket and solder it in place and then plug the chip into the socket when everything is cool. An 8-pin socket looks like this. Here is a possible physical layout for the Arduino/motor interface using a piece of strip board with 31 copper strips, each with 39 holes in it. Thomas Buie describes the power supply method which he has used successfully in the past. It is a very simple arrangement which uses readily available parts which can be purchased easily through the internet. First, there is a car battery, and that feeds an inverter like this particular unit, which is an European inverter which produces anything from 220 to 240 volts with powers of 2000 watts continuous and 4000 watts peak output. It is also cheap at £25 delivered, and it has 2 handy USB output power sockets as well. However, we want 400 volts or more at 1 amp or more, and as that is some 800 watts for a 12-volt inverter like this, so Thomas has used a transformer to step the voltage up higher. Getting a transformer like this is not at all easy, as very few people want a 400-volt power supply. The rectification is very straightforward. A possibility which bypasses the need for a transformer of that type would be to use a voltage doubler circuit to raise the inverter output up to 440 volts or so, the diodes being, say, 1N5408 or UF5408, which can handle 1000 volts at 3 amps, which is a good deal more than is needed for the system. The disadvantage of doing that is that the output is effectively only a half-wave power supply. The capacitors would be 400 volts each, and so the output capacitance would be safe for anything up to 800 volts. The transformer in the diagram is inside the inverter, and V in the diagram would be 220 volts, giving an output of 440 volts. One possibility which avoids the need for a transformer and still provides a full-wave rectified 440V output is to use 2220V inverters. In this arrangement, both inverters are supplied by a single car battery and the output is 440 volts. Each inverter supplies only half of the wattage. It is suggested that a method which skips both the inverter and the transformer would be to use a DC chopper circuit, which could take the 12 volts from the car battery and produce a 400 volt 20 kHz output directly in one operation. A DC chopper of that type looks like this. While a DC chopper power supply is not suitable for all applications, it is felt that this cheap unit costing US $35 from https://clickaliexpress.com/e/1rhgpqc would be suitable for this generator project. While the circuit wiring is shown above, we need a physical board with the electronic components attached to it. The wiring connections are normally solder joints, but making those joints can be quite difficult as some of them are very close together. If you are experienced at soldering, then there should be no problem, but if you have not soldered before, then you should get an experienced friend to do the soldering for you. Here is a suggested board layout using strip board, often called Vero board. No matter how the 400 volts is generated, it is necessary to feed some 70 amps back to the battery output and inverter input to sustain the motor indefinitely. While the diagram above just shows a battery charger, the level of feedback is much higher than any ordinary battery charger can supply. So, we are talking about a professional level charger able to deliver some 700 watts of power continuously. This generator system has a coefficient of performance greater than 14, but even with that high performance it needs an input of about 700 watts for an output of 10,000 watts. Consequently, this battery charger link is very important, and commercial units which can do the job cost something like £150. We come now to the alternator, which produces the electrical output, which is the whole point of the system. All of the components and methods described so far have the objective of spinning the alternator indefinitely in order to provide electrical power for a household. However, please understand clearly that your local power company is most unlikely to allow you to connect your generator up to their wiring, which goes to your fuse box. Consequently, it is better if you use your new supply of electrical power as if it were an emergency backup generator. That is, you connect it up to your appliances without connecting it to any external power supply or wall socket. The system described so far is perfectly capable of driving an alternator of any power level up to 10 kilowatts without altering any of the components. So, the size of the alternator which you buy is up to you. Personally, I would consider an output of 5 kilowatts as being adequate to excessive, but then my electrical needs are probably far lower than yours might be. Anyway, in the UK one supplier is Machine Mart and they offer 3 different alternators. They look like this and each needs to be driven at 3000 RPM. Looking at the small price difference between the alternators, there seems to be very little reason not to pick the 6.5 kVA unit even if your expected current is likely to be well below that rating. The kVA rating is the same as kilowatts if the power factor of the load is 1, that is just light bulbs. Generally speaking, a 6.5 kVA alternator is considered to be a 5 kilowatt unit for driving washing machines, vacuum cleaners or equipment like that. The final step is to mount the motor unit and alternator unit together so that the motor can drive the alternator to provide the required electrical output. Thanks is due to Thomas Buie for sharing his design freely. Thomas has joined with the Free Energy Special Interest Group, FESIG, and they are preparing a series of instruction videos and actual physical construction of a generator via the website http://www.truevisionofpeace.com/fesig.html, and you can ask questions during the live sessions. Thomas's own website is youtube.com/channel/ucdioncelhfkiovthfszs2qpwg. The Arduino code file www.freenergyinfo.com/arduino.txt is a free download. There is one issue which needs to be dealt with, and that is the plastic construction of parts of the motor. The motor was intended to power a washing machine, and because that operation is slow and the mechanical stresses involved are fairly low, plastic was used. In this application the stresses are much higher and the usage is all day every day as opposed to the occasional use of a washing machine. My apologies to mothers with children. It would be necessary to replace the plastic parts with mild steel, both for the hub of the rotor and the casing of the stator in order to drive the larger sizes of alternator. Machining by a local steel fabrication shop may be necessary unless you already own a lathe or have access to one. Alternatively, Gerard Morin offers those components, although at what looks to me like rather large prices at https://www.hyperdrivehv.com/. The idea being that the existing plastic rotor boss is replaced with a metal unit, and the motor effectively rebuilt until only the original coils and magnets remain. While doing that adds considerable extra cost and effort, it does result in a very robust and powerful motor which is ready to drive a large alternator. Let me stress that if you were to construct a generator system like this, you do not connect it to the wiring of the local electricity power supply company. For example, the electrical main supply wiring will come into your household fuse box or contact breaker box. Do not connect your generator wiring to that same box, but instead treat your generator in the same way as an emergency generator, feeding the generator output directly to your washing machine, electric heater, vacuum cleaner or whatever through an extension cable and not through a wall socket. If you are very keen to have your new generator connected to your fuse box, then be sure to install a break before make heavy-duty switch to disconnect the outside power supply cable before your generator output is connected to the fuse box. This is important because if a fault occurs in the mains wiring and they turn off the mains power while they fix it, the workman might get a fatal shock from your generator even though their wiring is supposed to be switched off. It has been pointed out that this possible version of the interface board which goes between the Arduino and the 400, volt drive to the three-phase motor has one feature which could be considered to be a potential weakness. The three red arrows show a copper strip which passes from the 12-volt Arduino area into the 400-volt motor area, and it is felt that there is the potential for a back EMF voltage spike to be fed back along that copper track and damage the IR2104 chip or even the Arduino board itself. It is suggested that the introduction of a fast Schottky diode in those links would block that possibility. For that we would need a Schottky diode which can withstand the 400 to 500 volts which gets fed to the motor and the current needed by the motor. The Mauser supplier of electronic components has a range of such diodes. For example, SCS306AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 6 amps and 46 watts, sells for £2.91. SCS308AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 8 amps and 57 watts, sells for £3.47. SCS310AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 10 amps and 71 watts, sells for £4.04. SCS312AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 12 amps and 78 watts, sells for £4.76. SCS315AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 15 amps and 93 watts, sells for £5.08. SCS320AHGC9 rated at 650 volts, 20 amps and 115 watts, sells for £6.17. The packaging is like this. So, if we are to take the advice which recommends one of these diodes placed in line with lines which lead out to each phase of the motor, then the board layout would change to this. Advancing the fundamental understanding of electric generator performance, electricity and magnetism, Newtonian mechanics, energy, and the physics nature of the universe with the inclusion of work-energy principle into Lenz's law of induction. Thane C. Hines, Chairman and Co-founder and CTO, Potential Difference Inc. Abstract. This paper involves the inclusion of the work-energy principle into Lenz's law of induction. This provides us with a completely new perspective with regards to electrical generator performance, the role of work and energy, and the source of the energy required to perform work in electric generators. This process has important implications with regards to advancing our understanding of the subjects of electric generator performance, electricity and magnetism, the nature of electromagnetically induced magnetic fields, energy, specifically the conservation of energy, Newtonian mechanics, and the physical structure of universe. Sir Isaac Newton formulated the subject of Newtonian dynamics in terms of the three laws of motion. Lenz's law has been used by physicists since 1822 to explain how Newton's third law is expressed in electricity generation and specifically with regards to electric generator performance. More recently, Lenz's and Newton's third law are employed colloquially in the explanation of electric vehicle regenerative braking, whereby an electric vehicle's kinetic energy is reduced when it is converted to electrical energy and stored in an electric vehicle's battery. We can state Newton's third law effectively, as follows. Law 3, to every action there is always an equal and opposite reaction. A force, F, acting on a body of mass, M, will be accompanied somewhere by an equal and opposite reaction force, F. 1 Newton's second law states that acceleration of an object is proportional to the force acting on it, and inversely proportional to its mass. This law can be used to help demonstrate the law of conservation of energy, which states that energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system, that the total energy of an isolated system remains constant over time. In an isolated system, neither matter nor energy transfer between a system and its surroundings are allowed. The current widely accepted understanding of our universe is that it is an isolated system, because it contains everything by definition, and thus there can be no exchange of energy with anything. If there could be, it would already be counted within the universe. 2. Within our known isolated universe and within all the laws of physics with which we use to describe it, the overriding principle states that, no creation of energy and no destruction of energy is allowed. The work-energy principle's inclusion into Lenz's law of induction provides us with a very important contribution to the continued expansion of our understanding of the relationship between work and energy and the physical structure of our universe. Index terms: electric generators, electric generator efficiency, Lenz's law, Newtonian mechanics, electricity and magnetism, energy, work, power, torque, electric vehicles, EV, work energy principle, universe, isolated system, closed system, open system, infinite efficiency. Introduction. It is universally accepted that an electric generator is a machine, which converts mechanical input energy to electrical output energy. The current accepted explanation of electric generator performance is provided by several laws of physics, including Faraday's law of induction, Lenz's law of induction, Newton's third law, and the law of conservation of energy, which all work in concert to provide an explanation of the relationship between the magnitude of mechanical input energy and its conversion to electrical output, and the process involved. According to Faraday's law, whenever the flux threading through or linking with a closed circuit is changed, an electromotive force, EMF or voltage, is induced, which causes a current to flow in the circuit. The direction of the induced current has definite relation to variation of the field that produces it. This relation is formalized by Lenz's law of induction, which may be stated as follows: an induced EMF will cause a current to flow in a closed circuit in such a direction that its magnetic effect will oppose the change that produces it. This rule follows directly from the law of conservation of energy, that is, to cause an induced current to flow requires the expenditure of energy. In this case of a generator, for example, when the induced current is caused to flow through a load connected to the generator, electrical energy is expended. The field produced by the current is always in a direction so that it reacts with the main generator field, to oppose the turning action of the prime mover driving the generator. Thus, the greater the electrical energy supplied to the load, the greater is the reaction, and in turn the greater is the mechanical energy required from the prime mover. Energy must be supplied to the generator at the same rate that it is being taken from the generator. The US patented Regenx generator introduces a load current delay into electric generator performance. This activity has further implications with regards to Lenz's law of induction, Newton's third law, the law of conservation of energy and definition of our universe. The conservation of energy law is absolute law, also known as the first law of thermodynamics, states that the energy of a closed system must remain constant. It can neither increase nor decrease without interference from outside. The universe itself is a closed system, so the total amount of energy in existence has always been the same. The forms that energy takes, however, are constantly changing. 15. We now know that the universe is expanding at a faster and faster rate, propelled by something scientists call dark energy. This is thought to be the intrinsic energy per cubic centimeter of empty space. But if the universe is a closed system with a finite amount of energy, how can it spawn more empty space, which must contain more and more intrinsic energy, without creating additional energy? It turns out that in Einstein's theory of general relativity, regions of space with positive energy actually push space outward. As space expands, it releases stored-up gravitational potential energy, which converts into the intrinsic energy that fills the newly created volume. So even the expansion of the universe is controlled by the law of energy conservation. In physics and chemistry, the law of conservation of energy states that the total energy of an isolated system remains constant. It is said to be conserved over time. This law means that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, rather, it can only be transformed or transferred from one form to another. For instance, chemical energy is converted to kinetic energy when a stick of dynamite explodes. If one adds up all forms of energy that were released in the explosion, such as the kinetic energy and potential energy of the pieces, as well as heat and sound, one will get exact decrease of chemical energy in the combustion of dynamite. In physical science, an isolated system is either of the following: a physical system so far removed from other systems that it does not interact within them. A thermodynamic system enclosed by rigid immovable walls through which neither mass nor energy can pass. This can be contrasted with what, in the more common terminology used in thermodynamics, is called a closed system, being enclosed by selective walls through which energy can pass as heat or work, but not matter, and with an open system, which both matter and energy can enter or exit, though it may have variously impermeable walls in parts of its boundaries. An isolated system obeys the conservation law that its total energy mass stays constant. Most often, in thermodynamics, mass and energy are treated as separately conserved. Our universe is considered to be by definition of the word isolated, because it contains everything and thus there can be no exchange of energy with anything. If there could be, it would be counted within the universe. Current model explanations and limitations. Electric generators are accepted as being closed systems, which include an energy input and an energy output. In electric generator operation, mechanical energy is the input and electrical energy is the output. Heat and noise are other energy conversion outputs, but because they are unintended consequences and are commonly referred to as losses in the system. Joule heating, also known as resistive, resistance, or ohmic heating, is the process by which the passage of electric current through a conductor produces heat. Joule's first law, also known as Joule-Lenz's law, states that the power of heating generated by an electrical conductor is proportional to the product of resistance and the square of the current. Joule heating is referred to as ohmic heating or resistive heating, because or its relationship to Ohm's law. It forms the basis for the large number of practical applications involving electrical heating. Resistors create electrical noise, called Johnson-Nyquist noise. There is an intimate relationship between Johnson-Nyquist noise and Joule heating, explained by the fluctuation dissipation theorem. If electric current is running through a wire loop with resistor in it, the current will rapidly go to zero, because of the resistance. Resistance dissipates electrical energy, turning it into heat, Joule heating. If one adds up all forms of energy that were released in a generator's conversion of mechanical to electrical energy and the energy converted to heat and sound, one will get exact decrease of mechanical input energy. This mechanical input energy decrease must be compensated with a mechanical energy input increase from the prime mover, if the kinetic energy of the prime mover generator system is to be maintained. In physics, energy is the quantitative property that must be transferred to an object in order to perform work on, or to heat, the object. Energy is considered to be a conserved quantity. The law of conservation of energy states that energy can be converted in form, but not created or destroyed. 8. A quantitative property is a property of a physical system, which exists in a range of values corresponding with a number, such that the system can be described as having a particular number of unit of measurement of that property. Lenz's law is also referred to as motor action in a generator. Where the prime mover is rotating the generator in a clockwise direction, and the electromagnetic fields set up by the induced currents in the armature windings attempt to drive the generator as a motor in counterclockwise direction. This tendency to oppose the prime mover is called motor action in a generator. The higher the current in the armature windings, the stronger the motor action. Motor action in a generator is also often referred as generator armature reaction, counter-electromagnetic torque, magnetic effect, electric vehicle regenerative braking. Figure 3.0 Motor action, negative work performed, in a generator. Motor action in a generator is a counter-electromagnetic torque, which performs negative work against the torque direction supplied by the prime mover. The result is additional mechanical input power must be supplied to the generator by the prime mover, if the system kinetic energy is to be maintained. Motor action in generator, or the reaction, physics, is described by the third law of Newton's of motion of classical mechanics. All forces occur in pairs such that if one object exerts a force on another object, then the second object exerts an equal and opposite reaction force on the first. The third law is also more generally stated as, to every action there is always opposite and equal reaction, or the mutual actions of two bodies upon each other are always equal, and direction to contrary parts. The attribution of which of two forces is the action and which is reaction is arbitrary. Either of two can be considered the action, while the other is its associated reaction. As stated previously, the electromagnetic field produced by the current is always in a direction so that it reacts with the main generator field, to oppose the turning action of the prime mover driving the generator. Thus, the greater is the electric energy supplied to the load, the greater is the reaction, and in turn the greater is the mechanical energy required from prime mover. Energy must be supplied to the generator at the same rate that it is being taken from the generator. If additional energy is not supplied to the prime mover, and if no additional mechanical energy is supplied to the generator's drive shaft at the same rate it is being taken from the generator, the counter-electromagnetic torque produced inside the generator will reduce the kinetic energy of the prime mover, and the generator's electrical energy output will drop to an undesired level. In electric vehicle operation, motor action in a generator aka regenerative braking will decelerate the electric vehicle, causing a reduction in the kinetic energy of the electric vehicle as the battery recharging drops simultaneously. In U.S. mechanical engineering, torque is defined mathematically as rate of change of angular momentum of an object. In physics it is called net torque. The definition of torque states that one or both of the angular velocity or the momentum of inertia of an object are changing. Moment is the general term used for the tendency of one or more applied forces to perform work and rotate object about axis, the concept which is called torque in physics. For example, a rotational force applied to a shaft causing acceleration, such as drill bit accelerating from rest, results in a momentum called torque. If torque is allowed to act through a rotational distance, it is doing work. The work being performed by the torque increases the kinetic energy of the drill bit. Work transfers energy from one place to another, or one from to another. Work is closely related to energy. The work-energy principle states that an increase in the kinetic energy of rigid body is caused by an equal amount of positive work done on the body by the resultant force, acting on that body. Conversely, a decrease in kinetic energy is caused by an equal amount of negative work done by the resultant force. Work-energy principle. This means that the work done is equal to the change in the kinetic energy. If the net work is positive, the kinetic energy increases. If the net work is negative, the kinetic energy decreases. Newton's third laws are primarily about work, energy and their interactions. Law I states that, every body of mass, m, preserves in its state of rest, or of uniform motion in a right line, unless it is compelled to change that state by forces, F, impressed thereon. That is to say that, if a force does not perform work on a body with certain mass, the kinetic energy of that body will not change. Law 2 states that, the alternation of motion of said body is ever proportional to the motive force, M, impressed on the body, and is made in direction of the right line, in which that force, F, is impressed. A body of mass, M, when acted on by a force, F, accelerates with an acceleration, A, such that F equal m asterisk A. The change in the kinetic energy of a body is dependent upon the magnitude of the force, work performed, and the mass of the body, i.e. the heavier the body, the more work is required to increase or decrease its kinetic energy. Law 3 states that, to every action there is always an equal and opposite reaction. A force, F, acting on a body of mass, M, will be accompanied somewhere by an equal and opposite reactive force, F. 1 Newton's third law of motion is ubiquitous in everyday life. For example, when you jump, your legs apply a force to the ground, and the ground applies an equal and opposite reaction force that propels you into the air. 17 When the subject of electricity and magnetism was being developed, Newton's third law was transferred over into electromechanics to explain motor action in a generator. Motor action in a generator, generator armature reaction, counter-electromagnetic torque, magnetic effect, electric vehicle regenerative braking, Lenz's law and Newton's third law all refer to the exact same thing. They all refer to the kinetic energy reduction effect that occurs during the process of electric power generation. The effect the generator has on the prime mover, and or the deceleration produced on an electric vehicle, when mechanical input energy is being converted to electrical output energy. Newton's third law and the work energy principle both state that, work refers to an activity involving a force and momentum in the direction of the force. Energy is the capacity for doing work. You must have energy to accomplish work. It is like the currency for performing work. To do 100 joules of work, you must expend 100 joules of energy. Power is the rate of doing work or the rate of using energy, which are numerically the same. If you do 100 joules of work in 1 second, using 100 joules of energy, the power is 100 watts. The work energy principle and Newton's second law mathematically ensures that if we want to increase the kinetic energy of an electric vehicle or accelerate it from an initial kinetic energy level to a higher kinetic energy level within a specified time interval, we must perform a certain amount of positive work on that vehicle. The work energy principle also ensures we must expend a certain amount of energy during this process, because energy is the currency required to perform that positive work. Conversely, if we want to decrease the kinetic energy of an electric vehicle or decelerate it from an initial kinetic energy level to lower kinetic energy level, within an identical time interval as above, we must perform an identical amount of negative work on that vehicle. The work energy principle also ensures we must expend an identical amount of energy in both cases, because energy is the currency required to perform both negative and positive work. If all the parameters in the electric vehicle example above are exactly the same, then we can mathematically quantify the exact energy expenditure required to perform the positive work, during acceleration, while increasing the vehicle's kinetic energy. Similarly, we can also quantify the exact energy expenditure required to perform the negative work, during deceleration, while reducing the vehicle's kinetic energy. In electric vehicle operation, it is universally accepted that the energy required to accelerate the electric vehicle and increase its kinetic energy, is provided by the chemical energy, which is stored in electric vehicle's battery, and its conversion to electrical energy, which is consumed by the electric vehicle's motor. In electric power generation, it is also universally accepted that the energy required to maintain the kinetic energy of the generator, when current is being supplied to the load, is provided by the prime mover, and the input energy source, which powers the prime mover. Building a new model. The questions this paper wishes to explore are: what is the energy source, which is required to produce the negative work performed during deceleration of the electric vehicle, when the vehicle's kinetic energy is reduced, and what is the energy source required for the generator to perform the negative work against the prime mover, reducing its kinetic energy and necessitating a prime mover input to increase as described previously in motor action in a generator. Where does this energy comes from? And more specifically, what is the energy source, which is required to produce the counter-electromagnetic torque and the rate of change of angular momentum, or net torque reduction of an electric vehicle's drive shaft, or a prime mover's drive shaft, which is connected to an electric generator under load? As provided previously, the definition of torque states that, one or both of the angular velocity or the moment of inertia of an object are changing, and an identical increase or decrease in the angular velocity, or the moment of inertia of an object will require the exact same magnitude of energy. Moment is the general term used for the tendency of one or more applied forces to perform work, and rotate an object about an axis. The concept is called torque in physics. 8. Inclusion of the work energy principle and expansion of Lenz's law of induction will provide the answers required, and this process will allow us to quantify the source and the nature of the energy required to perform this negative work or kinetic energy reduction in electric power generation and electric vehicle operation. Once again, Lenz's law states that an induced EMF will cause a current to flow in a closed circuit in such a direction that its magnetic effect will oppose the change that produces it. Magnetic effect refers to the electromagnetic field created around the current-bearing wires inside the generator, which make up generator coil. Oppose means to actively resist or work against the rotating magnetic field, which is responsible for initiating the change that produces it, i.e., the induced EMF and current in the first place. The resultant effect is the production of a counter-electromagnetic torque and negative work being performed on the generator's rotating magnetic field, and a reduction in the kinetic energy or deceleration of the electric vehicle and a reduction in the kinetic energy of the prime mover in electric power generation. Electric vehicle regenerative braking and motor action in a generator both refer to negative work being performed and system kinetic energy reduction. The answers this papers propose are: the nature of energy source, which is required to perform this negative work in both cases, is electromagnetic field energy. This energy is created around the current-bearing wires inside generator. This created energy source is most likely atomic interactions within the current-bearing wire. Inclusion of the work energy principle allows Lenz's law to be restated as follows: an induced EMF will cause a current to flow in a closed circuit in such a direction that the electromagnetic field energy created will perform negative work and oppose the change that produces it. This rule follows directly from the law of creation of energy. In the case of a generator, for example, when the induced current is caused to flow through a load connected to the generator, electric energy is expended in the load. The electromagnetic field energy created by the current is always in such a direction, that it produces a counter-electromagnetic torque, such that it reacts with the generator's rotating magnetic field. It reduces the kinetic energy of the prime mover and the torque supplied by the prime mover. The counter-electromagnetic torque performs negative work in opposing the turning action of the prime mover driving the generator. Thus, the greater the electric energy supplied to the load, the greater is the reaction, negative work performed by created electromagnetic field energy, and in turn the greater is the mechanical energy required to be supplied by the prime mover. Energy must be supplied to the generator at the same rate that it is being created inside the generator by the electromagnetic field energy, and at the same rate this created energy is performing negative work, if the kinetic energy of the system is to be maintained and not allowed to decrease. In electric vehicles drive shaft, and it will reduce the kinetic energy of the vehicle, when electric recharge current is being supplied to the electric vehicle's battery. Inclusion of the work energy principle into Lenz's law of induction introduces the law of creation of energy, and it also introduces a new energy system, an infinite energy system, where energy is being created over time. Figure 4.0 example of an infinite system, where energy out equal energy in plus energy created. In physics, the law of creation of energy states that the total energy of an infinite system is said to be created over time. This law means that energy can and is being created, and it can also be transformed or transferred from one form to another. For instance, if one adds up all forms of energy that were transformed in the generation of electricity, or the conversion of mechanical input energy to electrical output energy, as well as the heat and sound energy, and the electromagnetically created energy, which performs the negative work or kinetic energy reduction, one will get the exact increase in the energy created. For example, if an electric generator, which is said to be 98% efficient, is placed on load, and when it delivers 98 watts of electric power to the load, we can mathematically deduce that the mechanical input power in the generator's drive shaft must be increased by 100 watts. The required 100 watts mechanical input power increase exactly represents the 100 joules of energy created by the electromagnetic field energy and the 100 watts of negative work performed against the prime mover. Figure 5.0 Energy created and work performed in an electric generator. The law of creation of energy explains how negative work is being performed inside all electric generators by the electromagnetic field energy that is being created when electric power is delivered to a load, and how this energy can be quantified. Hind's law explains how this very same created electromagnetic field energy, when delayed sufficiently in time domain by the Regenx generator 14, can now be used to perform positive work, system kinetic energy increase during electricity generation, and why mechanical input energy is no longer required during electricity generation. Why electric generators can now be made to operate at infinite efficiency, in other words. Newton's fourth law of motion states that, when an electric generator's electric current is delayed sufficiently in time domain, the created electromagnetic field energy will produce an equal and complementary reaction. This equal and complementary reaction manifests itself as a complementary electromagnetic torque, which performs positive work in the same direction as the torque supplied by the prime mover. The kinetic energy of the prime mover is increased due to the positive work being performed by the time-delayed electromagnetic field energy created, and the prime mover's input energy consumption is reduced. Hind's law of induction states that, according to Faraday's law, whenever the flux threading through or linking with a closed circuit changed, an electromotive force, EMF or voltage, is induced, which causes a current to flow in the circuit. The timing of the current dictates the direction of the induced current, which also has a definite relation to the variation of the field that produces it. This relation is formalized by Hind's law of induction, which may be stated as follows: an induced EMF will cause a current to flow in a closed circuit. When this current is delayed sufficiently in time domain, the timing and direction of current, and its magnetic effect will assist the change that produces it. The rule follows directly from the law of creation of energy, that is, to cause a time-delayed induced current to flow, requires no expenditure of energy. In the case of a generator, for example, when the induced current is delayed sufficiently in the time domain by increasing the generator coil's impedance, the time-delayed current is caused to flow through a load, connected to the generator, and electric energy is expended in the load. The time-delayed electromagnetic field energy, created by the time-delayed current and the positive work performed, is always in a direction so that it reacts with the main generator field, to assist the turning action of the prime mover driving the generator. Thus, the greater the electrical energy supplied to the load, the greater is the reaction, positive work performed, system acceleration, and in turn no mechanical energy is required from the prime mover. Any magnitude of energy can be taken from the generator, while zero energy is required to be supplied to the generator in return, because no negative work is being performed by the created magnetic field energy. Hind's law of induction, Newton's fourth law of motion, motor action in a Regenx generator, complementary electromagnetic torque, and infinite electric generator efficiency can now all be observed in U.S. patented Regenx generator by Potential Difference Incorporated. Figure 6.0 Motor action, positive work performed, in U.S. patented Regenx generator. Motor action in a Regenx generator is a complementary electromagnetic torque produced by electromagnetic field energy that is created. This energy performs positive work in the same torque direction supplied by the prime mover. The result is no additional mechanical input power must be supplied to the generator by the prime mover, when the generator is delivering power to the load and operating at infinite efficiency. Figure 7.0 Energy created and work performed in a Regenx electric generator, when operating at infinite efficiency. When the US patented Regenx generator 14 is placed on load, the created and time-delayed electromagnetic field energy performs positive work, which accelerates and increases the kinetic energy of the prime mover. As a consequence, no additional input power is required to be supplied to the generator by the prime mover, no matter how much output power is delivered by the generator to the load. Conventional generator and Regenx generator on no load at rotational equilibrium. Scenario 1. No load. Conventional generator and Regenx generator on no load at rotational equilibrium. Mechanical input from prime mover equal X watts. Drive shaft net power equal 0 watts. Electrical output equal 0 watts. Scenario 2 on load. 98% efficient conventional generator on load at rotational equilibrium. Mechanical input from prime mover increases by 100 watts. Drive shaft net power equal 0 watts. Electrical output equal 98 watts. Negative work performed by 100 joules of created electromagnetic field energy equal 100 watts. Scenario 3 on load. Infinite efficient Regenx generator on load at rotational equilibrium. Mechanical input from prime mover increased by 0 watts. Drive shaft net power equal 0 watts. Electrical output equal infinite. Positive work performed by infinite joules of created electromagnetic field energy equal infinite watts. Figure 8.0 Performance comparisons of 98% efficient conventional and infinite efficient Regenx generators. Conclusions. Inclusion of work energy principle into Lenz's law identifies electromagnetic fields as a form of energy, which is created, and which can be quantized. The work energy principle ensures that energy is the currency required to perform both positive and negative work. This process introduces a new law of physics called the law of creation of energy, and re-identifies electric generators as being infinite systems, where energy is created from within. This created electromagnetic field energy produces a counter-electromagnetic torque during electricity generation, and it performs negative work against the turning action of the prime mover. The kinetic energy of the prime mover in electricity generation and the kinetic energy of an electric vehicle during regenerative braking are both reduced as a result of the work performed by this created energy. The law of creation of energy also ensures that our universe is an infinite system, where energy is being created and exchanged continuously within it, and where work is being performed by that created energy. This new information may have important impact on helping astronomers understand the creation and nature of our continually expanding and accelerating universe. It may be able to help explain how the kinetic energy of entire galaxies and planets within them can expand at even increasing speeds. In addition, the concept that different universes may exist with potentially different laws of physics can now be expanded to include our own universe. Figure 9.0 Examples of isolated, closed, open system and infinite systems. The US patented Regenx generator delays the generator's load current in the time domain, it produces a complementary electromagnetic torque, and the negative work, which is normally performed by the created electromagnetic field energy, is reversed such that positive work is performed. This positive work negates the mechanical input power increase requirement in electric power generation, and it now allows any magnitude of electricity to be generated with zero mechanical input power at infinite efficiency forever. In electric vehicle operation, the time-delayed electromagnetic field energy, that is created in the Regenx generator, performs positive work, and it accelerates the electric vehicle, while recharging its batteries. This innovation is called electric vehicle regenerative acceleration. The more battery recharge power delivered to the electric vehicle's batteries, the faster the batteries recharged, the more the vehicle is accelerated and the less plug-in recharge is required.